Coming up next on Insights on PBS Hawaii, Kakaʻako's building boom. Aloha and welcome to Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff of Hawaii News Now. For almost 4 decades, Kakaʻako revitalization plans have been in the works. The ultimate goal to transform the 450 acres of warehouses, repair shops, and small businesses into a live, work, play neighborhood featuring upscale apartment towers and workforce housing. All the changes are expected to double the population in Kakaʻako in just 14 years. Tonight, we'll examine the plans and the ongoing construction for this new urban center. What is the resulting impact for area businesses, as well as its potential for the state's overall economic growth? Will the boom in development bring a concrete jungle or an urban oasis, reducing traffic congestion while increasing affordable housing? We always like to hear from viewers like you, so share with us your questions and comments about Kakaʻako's building boom by calling 973-1000 if you're on Oahu, or 800-238-4847 if you're on a neighbor island. You can also watch Insights streamed live at pbshawaii.org. Just click on the title of tonight's show, or find us on Twitter at PBS Hawaii. Now to our guests. John Whalen is an urban and regional planner whose professional career extends nearly half a century in government and private practice. He has served since April 2015 as chair of the Hawaii Community Development Authority, which has jurisdiction over land use and development in the districts of Kakaʻako, Kalailoa, and Aiea on the island of Oahu. Sharon Moriwaki is a resident of Kakaʻako and president of the community group Kakaʻako United. I almost called you the president of Kakaʻako. The group came together in 2013 to ensure Kakaʻako's development conformed to laws that promised middle-class housing and a mixed-use neighborhood with open space and public facilities. Steve Scott is the CEO and owner of Scott Hawaii, the first manufacturer of slippers or flip-flops to be located in the United States. They were located in Kakaʻako since 1955. Among Steve's biggest concerns are property tax increases, lack of adequate infrastructure, and the impact of rail construction on small businesses. He is also the vice chair of the Hawaii Community Development Authority. And Christian O'Connor was senior asset manager for Kamehameha schools in the Kakaʻako area and was instrumental in shaping its 15-year redevelopment master plan called Our Kakaʻako for its 9 blocks in the area. Christian is now a managing member of Center City LLC, a Honolulu-based company whose mission is to improve everyday living through creative investments and design-driven projects, mostly in underutilized or transitional urban neighborhoods. Insights did reach out to developers building in Kakaʻako, but all declined our invitation to be a guest on our panel. Although some developers had scheduling conflicts, others declined to be on the show because they had concerns about how tonight's discussion might impact their future development plans. I don't know any idea how that might happen. Let me start with you, Sharon Moriwaki. As a resident of the area, why should we care so much about Kakaʻako? I mean, we know you guys have concerns, but why should the rest of us be concerned about it?
I think it's the last open space in downtown Honolulu, and it is more than the 450 acres. It's the 600 acres, so it spans the Makai side as well along the coastline. And if you look at some of the development, you'll see a high water table, so it really is affecting the community. And we live there, so it's very important to us that Kakaʻako is built so that it is a quality neighborhood, that it does have green open space and parks and affordable housing, so that we can have mixed use. I mean, the whole law that created HCDA and the Kakaʻako district was to be mixed use, mixed density, mixed income community, a community where it was for all of us who live here.
You know, Steve Scott, as a businessman in the area, how do you feel that we should be concerned about Kakaʻako? And I mean, you're a small business. I mean, do you feel like you're going to be able to stick it out there?
I think there are some concerns, long-term concerns for a lot of the small businesses down there in Kakaʻako. And one of them is, if you look at central Kakaʻako, you find small shops, small parcels. They're generally not large enough to develop. And if anyone in town needs a car repaired, they probably go to Central Kakaʻako. If anyone is looking for some small things in small warehouses, they have to go to Kakaʻako. And my biggest fear is that the city will push through transit-oriented development will push a lot of those small businesses to disappear because they will not be able to survive. And I'm a small business. I own property there on Kona Street, but it's a concern that eventually we're going to be forced to either move or develop.
Where do you disappear? If you don't disappear, though, where would you go if not Kakaʻako?
Well, that's the one big problem. Where are the people that actually go to those businesses? Where are they going to go? They're going to go out to Kalihi? There's no property out there available for a lot of these small lots. And I don't think you're going to find a lot of places in East Honolulu for these small businesses. So where are they going to go? And that's the biggest concern. I mean, this is, if you take a look at where most of the people that live in Honolulu, where do they go for services? Where do they go for car repairs? Where do they go for other things? It's Central Kakaʻako.
Yeah, we're gonna talk quite a bit more about that in a little bit later in our show. Let me give Christian O'Connor a chance. As one of the people who tried to build a vision for Kakaʻako on a large landowner's parcel, what did you see as the greatest opportunities there? Was it? I think a lot of people assume it was just to make money, but you saw it as much more than that.
Yeah, it was about creating a tapestry and a community that was focused on art and innovation, and really trying to grow the entrepreneurial base was a lot of the work that continues to be done in Kakaʻako. And so there is some exciting opportunities where, you know, if we can work funds into the community where we get all these benefits from land transactions and sales of condos, and those monies can flow in, some of those, not a lot of them, just a little bit, can flow into the art community, and they can create that street experience that she would love and create art, unique art that's sourced here, developed here, built here. I mean, I think there's a lot of great opportunity there. And then the amount of body heat and the amount of opportunities that small business owners will have to hopefully flourish and move into space, as long as, you know, the landowners try to honor small businesses and local businesses, is a great opportunity as well. So I think, and it's great because, you know, there's a lot of people that are moving into Kakaʻako. 680 Ala Moana is a great example of the collection when it comes on. A lot of the Howard Hughes stuff, they'll have businesses and they'll be the creators, hopefully some of them at least, that will start to create those businesses and be able to work and walk to work and do those things.
Let me give John Whalen a chance here. John, you have been in the Kakaʻako planning milieu since 1970 something, right? And
mid 1970s, yeah.
Tell me a little bit about what happened back at the beginning for you, and what did you think of Kakaʻako back when it was a city, and how has it changed in the last 40 years?
Well, it's changed significantly, but back in the mid 1970s, it was Kakaʻako was still under city jurisdiction. And the city developed a special design district for Kakaʻako. I think there was already interest from particularly the two major landowners in Kakaʻako to do redevelopment, significant redevelopment in Kakaʻako. And it's understandable why someone would look at that opportunity, because it Kakaʻako occupies a special or central location in urban Honolulu. It's kind of the bridge between downtown and Ala Moana and Waikiki. But the city, I think, resisted the idea of losing jurisdiction over land use and development in that area, because it is so central to the city.
Let me ask though, what was, you know, it's been 40 years, and you know, the right now there's a lot of residential going up there, but I mean, why did it take so long for it to suddenly burst onto the scene?
Well, there were a lot of infrastructure deficiencies in the early stages. So the HCDA had to invest quite a bit in improving the streets. I mean, even though there are still areas remaining to be improved or functional, yes, the conditions were even more challenging 40 years ago. So there has been a lot of investment in infrastructure. That's part of it. And then there are also economic cycles. I mean, there are periods when there was a lot of construction, and then it tapered down, and then it kind of reversed itself. And so you see, and it tends to come in waves. I think what we're experiencing now has been a lot of condominium construction, high-end condominium construction, but there have also been periods when a lot of affordable housing has been built in Kakaʻako, particularly in the early period when the state financed a lot of the housing development there.
Let me ask
early projects.
Christian O'Connor, when you folks, when Bishop State, Kamehameha Schools was looking at redeveloping, why did it take, I mean, this was it was just in the last 7 or 8 years that you developed a plan. Why is it that didn't happen 15, 20, 30 years ago?
Yeah, I don't think that's fair. I think it is economic cycles, and I think KS had a very much more robust plan previously, and it had, I think, 16 towers, and I may be wrong about that, but it was a very aggressive plan, a lot more density than what was ended up entitled, and so. I mean, I think that, you know, market cycles change, opportunities change. Within an organization like that, you know, needs change and things where they want to invest their time and their energy change. And so I think all of those things really allowed a great plan to come together and start to be implemented down Keawe Street. And I think the time it took for it to be prepared and the entitled land that you see today is a great program generally, and I think it's even more beneficial and more appropriate than the previous plan that they had embarked on. And so it's timing, it's energy, it's effort, and it's just, you know, it just was the right time over this last, you know, 8 or 9 years.
Steve Scott, when you look
Yes.
around you, what do you see coming? What does it look like to you? I mean, you're a little businessman, not a little businessman, but you're sitting there and all these plans are happening, or do you feel reassured at all by planning?
I think the 800-pound gorilla in the room is rail. And we're going to be affected somewhat because rail is going to go right in front of us. But if you take a look at the zoning where we're at right now, we're zoned for a 35-story high-density residential unit.
Right where you are?
Right where we are.
How'd that happen?
You'll have to ask the city. This is the transit-oriented development overlay. And this is where I fear many businesses along the rail route will be dramatically affected because they're going to be forced to either sell out or to develop, just because the taxes will become such that they're going to be forced to. And as a small business, you just can't afford to do that.
I have a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, is anything happening on the state or city side to prevent losses to you guys as rail comes through your corridor?
There is one bill that is actually at the city council to help us. Well, there's a couple bills. One is to actually lessen the tax bite, at least for 5 years. That
It'd be great to forgive GET and RPT, right?
well,
right?
Property taxes.
that's the big problem. Is the city is looking for funds
Right.
to build this rail, so they're not really that willing to give up to get rail done. I mean, you take a look at what's happening in Waipahu and what's happening in the Pearl area, and it's dramatically affecting small business out there. And you can have all these programs where you ride and dine and wherever they have out there, and it's not working.
Sharon Moriwaki, as a resident, when you see more towers springing up around you, do you feel like the government has played any real role in controlling what's going on?
No. And in fact, the last administration was, pay to play kind of administration. So a lot of the rules that were in place that should have been followed were not followed. Affordable housing was not really affordable there. I think the current board, is looking at changing those rules, which is, 140% of area median income is $120,000 for a household, and that's like more than 3/4 of the population.
Let me ask this, though, as a resident on that particular issue, and let's talk a little bit about affordability, because I've gotten several viewer questions. When you bought there, what was your vision of the kind of neighbors you would have? I mean, you're on ocean, you're looking out at the ocean, right? And so
I think when you buy, you're looking at the quality of life that you're going to have around you, and you knew that you were going to have buildings around you. But the intent was that it'd be a community. It's not a community. It is luxury, mostly luxury high rises, and if they're going for $1 million, you're not going to have people who are, a lot of it is offshore money too, and investors. So if you go around Kakaʻako at night, at least 40% of the lights are, the units are dark.
That's my 8 o'clock rule. Excuse me, that's my 8 o'clock p.m. rule. Go down there and look at the buildings, like Sharon says, and you'll find at least 40, if not 50% of the apartments dark.
And they're
this
not
is
out
8 o'clock
partying.
at night.
They're not out partying.
I don't think so.
I don't think so. And that's the problem, because if you want to build a community, you would have grocery stores. Well, we have, just about a couple of months ago, we have a 7-Eleven, and that's our grocery store. Until Whole Foods comes in, I don't know when.
Let me shift this affordability question to John Whalen, who is right in the middle of that issue, and several questions, but are there misconceptions about this? I mean, is some of what Sharon's saying a misconception, or is truly, at this stage, are we looking at mostly high-end buyers moving in there, mostly investors, a lot of it offshore money? Is all of that true?
Well, I think in the current economic cycle, certainly a lot of the new buildings going up are targeted to that luxury market. And I think that's what's alarming to people, to see so much of that happening at this time. But stepping back a little bit and looking at this historically, over the past 40 years, about 38% of the units that have been built in Kakaʻako are for qualified income households. In other words, people that meet those income weren't previously homeowners, but are buying in for the first time, and also for renters.
Let me.
I'd like to.
Hold on, I want to get this clarified, because you're talking about, instead of talking about the snapshot of this current economic cycle, you're saying that back in the years before this, there were projects that were specifically oriented, and that's where you're talking about that 38% comes from.
Right, and I think what the current board is interested in doing is trying to reintroduce that cycle of affordable housing, particularly affordable rental housing. That's really what's needed, because Kakaʻako is part of a larger picture in urban Honolulu, and the real demand for housing at this point is for affordable rental housing. And we really need to develop more of that in the urban core.
Christian, you wanted to?
Yeah, I was just thinking, when we're talking about housing in this particular cycle, I mean, I think Kamehameha Schools has so far, done a pretty good job. You've got Keaho Lane, that is Stanford Carr, and then Stanford Carr previous to that developed 205 units that were all affordable rentals on a long-term ground lease. And then in addition to that, you've got 680 Ala Moana, and then you've got additional units that will be developed on the Howard Hughes side. So, it may not be the percentages that were always dictated, but a really great way to understand is if you just pull the demographic information of the neighborhoods right now, still, looking at 2010, looking at 2015, I mean, the numbers are still lower than Kaimuki, Kahala, Mililani. I mean, much lower, right? You're in the 50s and stuff. So you can that is kind of a product of the amount of housing supply that's already in that area. And it's showing you that, it's a lower income sash that currently exists.
But
now, that's not the future.
I want to say that we have data that shows that in the last administration, 4,838 units were built, and only 84 of those were in that lower income level, 80% or less. So if you look at that, it's like less than 2%.
But there's just a slight lag between when the luxury, some of the higher end stuff, not luxury necessarily, but higher end stuff gets built, and then there's this two to 3 year gap where the affordable housing stuff will come online. And I think what we'll see over the next 3 to 5 years is that additional affordable housing towers, 803 Waimanu, which is kind of a different, I think it's a Franco Mola's project, and some other ones will come online. As the luxury has halted its development over time, these products would follow suit, and so the building will continue. It'll be in that affordable mix that what we really desire.
But developers are not going to go to 120% or even lower unless they're required to, right? So they were building at affordable at 140%, and that therein lay the problem.
But I think what
which
you
the
said-
current board is trying to fix.
But I think what you said was really important is that 140%, there's only so much of a population that qualifies, that fits that
Very-
bill.
yeah.
So what happens is the developers have to then, be in the 80%, 100%, 120% because they have to sell the units, and so that changes their.
The problem is they
But they
can't
have it.
necessarily afford to build at the current cost of land, cost of property taxes,
think
and
that's
cost of construction.
Right.
So they're hamstrung in some respects because they can't afford to build the lower cost. So unless they have help either with the cost of the land or the cost of financing, higher densities, less parking,
Right.
there are obstacles to their building lower income housing.
Let me also, John, I'll let you respond to that in a second. I want to get to a couple of viewer questions because we've already got quite a number, and which is a good sign. One question is, if many of the units are being bought by foreign investors part-time, will they have an incentive to be part of the community? Let me just first deal with this. I mean, are we seeing a lot of foreign investment? I know that a lot of these buildings, they're bought by people who are represented by limited liability companies, which could be a foreign buyer, shrouded in a local company. Do we know how much foreign buying is going on, and does it tend to be underestimated based on, the difficulty in seeing really where the money came from for that unit?
Well, I think you hit on the question, the important question, because it is hard to fix exactly how much of this is offshore buying.
It's opaque.
It's opaque, yeah.
Well, you also find some locals who will come in and buy, and then
Yeah.
they flip it
Right.
Investors.
to investors, and they never intended to live there.
But I think, I just knowing from my past that the buyer sets that I saw in Kamehameha Schools land, their price points were lower. They were more moderately priced for people that live here. They're doing a rental project as well. That's affordable rentals. So I think there's two experiences out there. But I got to say that A&B, from my understanding, was really focused on local buyers, and that's why that's what it was all about.
A and B, they developed Waihonua, and they were required to have a certain amount of reserved housing. Instead of putting the reserved housing in their building, they said, okay, we're going to build our reserved housing on the corner of
Outside.
Pi'ikoi and Kona Street.
I recall.
They were allowed, the previous board allowed them to walk away from their responsibility to build their affordable housing, and they turned the land over back to HCDA, who in turn now has tried to enlist Stanford Carr to build it. The previous board should never have allowed A and B to walk away. Their responsibility was to build.
Because I always thought Stanford was always going to do that.
No,
well,
he was
he's
not.
great at it.
Well, he's great at it, but now there's a lag of about 5 years.
Okay, I think we're getting a little bit in the
sorry.
weeds. No, I don't mean to be critical, but Stanford Carr is a longtime housing developer in Hawaii, and he's
great.
recently really turned his focus onto affordability. And I've spoken to him quite a bit. It's really complicated.
Yes.
You need really cheap land, you need very creative financing, and so on. And so, John Whalen, what are you doing to be able to encourage guys like that to build these kind of housing?
And this isn't something that HCDA can do single-handedly. Really, the companion piece to this is tax credit financing, rental housing trust fund, other forms of financial assistance from the state housing agency.
And there hasn't been
HHFDC.
enough of that around before?
There hasn't been enough of that around before. The legislature did appropriate some increase to the rental housing trust fund. So that's helpful. And there are bills now at the legislature to increase the amount of tax credit financing that's available, as well as increase the rental housing trust fund.
What about available free public land, or what's in there? Is there
Yes.
land that's available for this? And how do you set a priority between building affordable housing, or say having a park?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, there are competing needs for a community. It's not just about housing. It's also those other parts that make it a real community. So in some cases, we're looking at the possibility now of a public school and an affordable rental housing project sharing a site, the former Pohukaina school site, as a matter of fact. But we're going to have to, that's actually the last piece of public land that's available for any type of use or new use. So we really have to be looking at either acquiring additional property, maybe accepting land dedication in lieu of actually building the housing.
Which is what A&B did that we were talking about that was objectionable.
Well, yeah, but I think what Steve's saying is that there's an obligation that comes with that to dedicate the land.
When we're talking about what I've come across, we're looking outside of Kakaʻako and in
Right.
Kakaʻako as we look to answer some of our issues. And so right now we're on HAWAIʻI Street, which is very challenging in and of itself. And so what we think is great is when we started looking at the rental housing fund, what we noticed is there's a lot of hooks and a lot of issues associated with how long you have to hold on to those and what your disposition looks like and your exit strategy is. And so has there been any conversation about starting to make it the funds more accessible and usable and creating a little bit more optionality for the developer after they get done and they do what they said they're supposed to do?
I know the State Housing Agency is looking at changes to their procedures because they allow applications or requests for tax credit financing only for certain periods of time, I think every 6 months. And now they're looking at accepting applications or requests on a continuous basis.
Oh, that's great.
Now, as far as the terms and the length of the term for affordability, for example, a lot of that is dependent on federal legislation, because this.
Let me ask Sharon, you've watched this process. Do you think that the fact that you have the state up to this border and the city to this border and OHA to this border and so on, do you think that's made it better or worse for this whole process of making decisions and doing the right thing?
I think it's worse. I think it's difficult because I think, for example, in terms of HCDA, it is a state agency in the city. And so the developers have had sort of a free-for-all because, if you went to the city, you would have had to go through the process.
City council and
and then, for example, affordable housing, it's at 120%, not 140%, like in the HCDA's. They could make their own definition. But the other thing is that there's a process and the community gets involved and you have representatives you can go to and say, hey, they're getting a variance without going through a process. We have a great board now that understands that. I think John, having been at the city, knows what the process is. And so there's a lot more community engagement. Whereas when we were under HCDA, a state agency, you go to the city and they say, oh, that's not ours, you go there.
Let me ask you another question, though, Sharon, and you guys can all weigh in on this. This is a question from a viewer. Why are income levels for affordable housing so high in Hawaii? General question, but as you're saying, a lot of this is influenced by laws outside of Kakaʻako. But are we respecting the fact that, we're expecting two-income families to buy these properties? We were bouncing some numbers around. A family of four at 140% of the median income is $120,000.
Yes.
And that's not a one-income family of four. So are we dooming people to two families for life
I
here?
think, Daryl, that was what the community had been going to HCDA in the prior administration and got nowhere, is that this income level that they used as their definition of affordable was not affordable. So, really very few people, and if you look at the income, the median income for Honolulu, most of that is less than. I think 3/4 of the population of Honolulu makes 80% or lower than the area median income.
Do you folks feel, generally as a panel, maybe Christian, I should ask you this question, that these affordable housing rates could be lowered and still be affordable for people to develop?
No. I mean, we would have loved to had our pricing lower on Hawaiʻi Street as we tried to start, as we're beginning to do small lot development, and so we can reutilize urban land. And our thing was we really wanted to hold it between the 5s and 6s. We would love to do that, but as we got there and as the numbers came in and as things hit us, we're in the 7s up to 8, and that's just the reality. And even then, we are doing everything we can to make it, and to make a project that's really not. It's like an endeavor of. It's a social thing. So we're working hard, and
just penciling it out. You're not talking about a big margin here. You're talking about just penciling it out and building something.
We're just talking about making it, and making sure you pay everybody back what you said you were going to give them. And even then, it's very challenging. So I think that, like we've talked about, I mean, so there needs to be. We need to keep working on getting that nutritious subsidies and let them work for us and really start to do that and make sure that land doesn't and construction doesn't consume those subsidies as well.
But part of the development for Kakaʻako anyway was that 20% was, quote, reserved housing, which was affordable, which would be at that level. And they could go market and hire, which they've done, with the luxury apartments that are going for $1 million or $100 million, is that, it was a scale, but at least 20% within that building it should have been there for
Right, but that's what you're saying, they fudged on all that.
Yeah.
Let me interrupt for a second to remind our viewers that tonight we're talking about Kakaʻako's building boom. We'd like to hear from you, so please call, email, or tweet your questions and comments. Call 973-1000 or 800-238-4847 if you're calling from a neighbor island. Let's move on to another subject that seems very important to our viewers. We've gotten several questions. Barbara and Hilo, if the population is likely to double in just 14 years, where is the infrastructure to handle all these people? Anonymous, how are they going to handle the additional sewage these buildings will cause? How many new toilets will flush into the old sewer system? Are the developers going to pay for a new system? So let me start, John Whalen. What do we have going here? I mean, I think I get this question all the time, and I keep saying that, well, the city says everything's fine, but I mean, do they have enough capacity, and are there big, huge infrastructure issues that are looming?
Well, I think actually in Kakaʻako, relative to some other areas in urban Honolulu, it does have capacity. The problem is that the areas surrounding Kakaʻako sometimes lack sufficient capacity in the sewer lines and the water lines. So you hear of sewer or water lines failing or rupturing. And there's a variety of reasons for that. And it depends a lot on the location. And there are pockets within Kakaʻako that lack sufficient capacity.
What about the sewer issue specifically? Is there enough capacity?
The sewer has been in zones, right?
Yeah.
And a lot of the broader area where you see a lot of the development, it was put down in the 80s. And so Central Kakaʻako didn't get a lot of these upgrades in infrastructure because there was an infrastructure assessment that hit the larger two the Ward and Kamehameha schools. And so they were the ones that absorbed the infrastructure costs and actually continue to pay it to this day from Ilalo up Cook and around. But Central Kakaʻako, it was a politically untenable thing to do to try to levy taxes on small businesses. You're just not going to get that done.
Can you give me a sense of how much money we're talking about when it comes to that?
Hundreds of millions of dollars. 200+ million went into infrastructure in the sewer systems and the water systems.
Initially, but recently.
Well, no. So initially it was sized for 16 towers in just the Kamehameha schools area. So now we're doing less density, and the odors that were being created and everything were actually due to anemic lines that didn't have enough flow, which actually causes fast erosion. It's a problem for
the pungent odor on Keawe Street.
It's a flow issue.
Leads you to question whether or not
we need to flush more toilets.
The infrastructure is sufficient.
It is.
And you get it when there's a heavy rain as well, because the water table is so high.
So Steve, let me you've been a long time small landowner in Kakaʻako. When you hear the word infrastructure, what does that mean to you in day-to-day, dollars and cents, getting in and out kind of thing?
Well, we've been on a road, Kona Street, for 60 years, and it hasn't changed one iota in 60 years. And actually, it's very difficult to get the city to come out there and actually patch the potholes. But if you go
in the city's potholes, whose potholes are they?
Well, on our part of Kona Street, it is the city's potholes, but it's hard to get them out there. The other problem is if you go into central Kakaʻako, the other issue is private roads. And that is the one hot button issue right now that I'll tell you is going to come to a head very shortly. I mean, they have a court case that's supposed to go to trial in October, and they're seeking some type of remedy before then. But until that issue is resolved, who's going to be responsible for any of the infrastructure? And it's one thing that Christian was talking about earlier is Kamehameha, they stepped up, the assessments were there, the improvements were made. That's why they can develop the land that they have down there. And Howard Hughes can do that because they have the infrastructure, they have the roads, they have the curbs, the gutters, the sidewalks. Central Kakaʻako, you take your life in your hands if you walk down there.
No, yeah,
I mean,
I've seen
either you're going to be
ride
run
a bike
over,
through there.
or after a heavy rain, cars are going to go by, you're going to get wet. But the big issue is who's going to be responsible for that? And the problem is they tried to do, was it ID 11 on Queen Street?
What's that mean?
Improvement district.
Right.
Okay.
And it was going to be a huge assessment against those small landowners.
And then you were
eventually
going to lose parking, weren't you?
they
And the buildings were going to have to
they
get
were going to
hit.
lose all the parking, the street parking that they have right now.
Right.
It's like
And the problem is right now that Kakaʻako Land Company has all that parking, or is claiming that parking on
claim
Queen
deed.
Street and other streets.
You know, here, John, it's been John Whalen, you know, as a planner and a person who was a city official, and now you're an appointed volunteer. It's crazy to me that 40 years after we started this process, it's still the wild, wild west, as Steve was just describing. I mean, is that a fair description of all these competing jurisdictions?
Right, for that pocket, the central Kakaʻako area, I think, has really been unresolved for all that time.
Do me a favor, describe, you know, for folks at home, when we talk about central Kakaʻako, what district of that are we talking about?
We're talking about the area generally, say, between,
Pohukaina maybe, starting there.
yeah, from Pohukaina, or actually Halikavila, from Halikavila up to Kapiolani Boulevard.
Okay, so it's that there's that sort of long rectangle there.
Yeah,
And then what about that area where they've got all the small businesses covered with really nice graffiti art? Is that also?
no, that's actually within Kamehameha schools.
And
we have
Central Kakaʻako.
Actually, we have it on our building.
Yeah.
Right.
Well, and that's really a great thing to talk about. Is there has been a lot of great opportunity for many different types of people as we've gone through this process. And the only time you get to see this, I think, and it's a seminal moment in all of our lives and our community's life, is that the only time you get an opportunity to create this creative expression and community is when you're going through a transition, because it just doesn't afford itself. When you're done with the transition, I don't want that on my wall, right?
Let me very quickly finish with this infrastructure issue and give you the chance to finish what you're saying is, you know, I thought the whole idea of the state taking this over was to basically bring some sort of semblance of order.
Right.
And it doesn't sound like that's happened. I mean, what has been the failure?
Well, this is where the state really has to interface with the city because there are proposals for the state or HCDA specifically to take over all the private streets. I mean, whether that's actually going to happen or not. But right now, there's litigation underway, so it's mostly private owners versus private owner. But in the meantime, the problem with HCDA taking over the streets and trying to develop is they have to be developed or improved to a certain standard. HCDA is not going to be around forever. It shouldn't be around forever. It's actually part of the city and county of Honolulu, so it's important that those private streets eventually become part of the city's street network.
Do you expect that at some point the state's going to step away from that district?
Oh, I think so, yeah.
When might that happen? Not that I'm hopeful or anything, I'm just curious.
Well, I don't know, but I think it's time for us to look at a transition.
And if that happens, what about taxpayers? Are taxpayers going to have to be in for infusing this area with money, people who don't live there, in order to really bring it up to speed? I mean, do you think
It's
that...
we just still pay city taxes, you know. I mean,
Right.
we're not separate. The only thing that's separate is the zoning. So
Right.
all the infrastructure is all being paid through our property tax.
So will there be enough people in Kakaʻako through this process to generate enough tax revenue so it's not a
30,000.
subsidized
They
community?
say 30,000.
Right.
I don't think there's going to be a time, after being to some of these discussions regarding the private roads, I don't think there's going to be a time soon because of the money that is required. And the city doesn't want it unless they can somehow improve it to their standards, or the state is not going to get involved unless they can somehow control it. The HCDA doesn't have the money to purchase the roads or improve them. I think it's very ambitious to require the small landowners to pay for the roads.
I disagree, though, and this is why. And you got to think about all the gross sales value of these condos is in the billions of dollars. And as they trade, there's a transfer tax, and there's a transfer tax on the land when it gets picked up to be developed, and there's a transfer tax, you know, and then there's the construction and the GET. So when you look at the pyramid of taxation, gosh, man,
Well,
it's a windfall, and it's the same streets, and the streets.
But
haven't
in central
changed,
Kakaʻako,
right?
you're talking about smaller lots that are typically 5,000 square feet that can't be developed unless they're consolidated. So how do you go in there and consolidate 4 or 5 of those to actually build a high rise? Well, I know, but
Businesses.
you're gonna need, basically you're gonna kick out all those businesses. And this is what I was talking about earlier. I don't think the city is ready to kick out all those businesses and have them go elsewhere so that everyone in town has no place to go to get their cars repaired, their store, whatever they're going to do.
Sure.
And that is a big problem.
But what if we come up with some kind of unique zoning that allows the industrial use to be in the base of the podium, and these lots get traded in, and then a guy goes up and builds affordable housing, but at the base you retain some of that.
Well, that was always the idea,
Right.
but it didn't prove out to be that way, right? Because
Well-
nobody wants to have an auto shop underneath their condo.
Right.
Well, if it's
But you could do it all
affordable.
the way up, you know. You could have industry all the way up the column.
I do think there are ways out of this conundrum, though, because the streets don't have to be, street improvements don't have to be financed through the usual improvement district approach where they're assessed to the frontage owners. There are other means to finance all of that. The other part of this is that could be the solution is complete streets. The idea of complete streets, so that the streets don't have to be designed to a standard that the city presently accepts, that they have more flexible design standards. And the model that I always have looked at is Granville Island in Vancouver, because it is an amazing place. It's an old industrial area that had been transformed into a mix of light industrial uses.
Well, my
public
impression
uses.
of that area, though, is that no one can afford to buy there, except there's tons of Chinese and Asian money there right now. I mean,
Oh, in the city of Vancouver, right?
right.
Yeah. Well,
Well, and
that's
around
kind of
Granville Island, right?
Yeah. I mean, you know, that's really, you know, part of the dilemma of being an attractive place
With all the things you need.
with all the things. But actually, Granville Island itself is really works. I mean, it has, you know, there's a cement plant there, and there's a boat repair place, and it's all mixed in with small artisan shops and repair shops and a public market.
And the rail looks just like our rail is going to look.
Well,
Let me
that's
ask
another
Sharon-
topic.
I know, Sharon,
That's a bad topic.
Well, Sharon Milwaukee, as a resident there, when you talk about this mix, how important is it to you that people like Scott are able to retain their small
I
businesses?
want him to be there. I think that makes a community, you know, and what John's talking about, Granville, if we could have the repair shops and the stores and the markets and a little cafe and all of that integrated, that's a community.
The street experiences, but yeah, and that's
that
it.
is
You're
a
right.
community.
That's knowing the man that actually built his company that you get your slippers from. I mean, and knowing his son and his family and knowing.
And we want parks.
Yeah.
And we want parks and green spaces that we could walk and open green. You know, I mean, make it
Yeah.
really a livable place. I mean, we'd love it.
Well, I'm going to explore that a little bit. I want to do like 5 minutes on rail, and let me go with Scott first. I mean, Steve, I knew that was going to happen. Yeah.
I answer to it
Scott's
all.
As long as you
What is your fear about the impact of rail? I mean, it's often talked about as being a huge opportunity, particularly transit-oriented development around rail stations. But as a small business person, what's your great fear?
I think it's the fear that those, as I said earlier, in Waipahu and out in Pearl City are facing, is that it is going to bring a lot of change that is not necessarily going to be good for business. In the short term, obviously, construction is a huge issue. We're looking at probably not being able to use the front of our building for however long it takes them to go past us.
And what do you do?
Well, that's what we're trying to figure out with HART. That's why we're negotiating with them. But it's going to bring some changes that I don't think are going to be good for the area. There's a lot that is being said about this TOD overlay, and if you take a look at what they expect is that overlay is going to be within a half mile of a rail station. You have 3 rail stations, actually 4 if you start at Aloha Tower. You have 4 from there to Ala Moana, and they're 3 of them are 2 blocks apart. I mean, that's just ridiculous.
Yeah, Sharon, as a resident, what are your concerns about rail? I mean, theoretically, everybody's values go up. You have access to this great transportation system.
Well, again, what Steve says, you know, these rail stations, I mean, it's not like a bus station now, you know, it's the rail station. It was supposed to be like long distances by which you would have spikes out, you know, with buses or trolleys or whatever. But the other thing about rail is that part of the problem is that the community has not been involved. We have this TOD overlay that Steve talks about. That was created by the previous administration with no input from the community.
Let me just get the definition of TOD overlay. So they put a rail station there, then they put a circle around it, right? And then they change the rules about what can happen in there. And that's, you know, but at the same time, Christian's been talking a little bit about the opportunities if people don't have to have so many parking stalls, which is an opportunity.
It's huge, and there's places. Arlington, Virginia has one of the best examples of transit-oriented development and growth over the period with these overlays.
Well, I'm not faulting that. It's great.
And
it's great for
where you're
opportunities.
located is the best place to be
it's
because
great for opportunities. But the problem is that if again a community is to prosper by it, and you have development, whether it's affordable housing or other shops or commercial development or light industrial development, that all should help to grow a community. But the community is not involved, and we're the first hit, you know, we're like the direct hit, and nobody asked.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's the problem. Nobody asked the community. And in
I
the
feel
city,
like there was a huge process, one that was more intense than I've ever seen in my lifetime.
Okay, let's move on now. I said 5 minutes on transit.
Okay.
I hit 5 minutes on transit.
Slow transit.
slow it down. Slow it down.
Now, a lot of questions about the quality of life. You mentioned plans for an elementary school. What does that mean to you, Sharon Moriwaki, that they might actually put a school in there? And what are the things that are really lacking for residents that are not making this a walkable community?
As I talked about it before, a community is all the amenities. It's just having a store, it's a grocery store, it's having schools, it's having parks, it's having green open spaces, and it's having, I mean, even services like maybe, you know, some kind of, not a hospital, but at least some kind of
like
urgent care or something like that. You know, that starts.
Or medical office building.
Starts developing, but if you don't have that, what kind of community do you have? You just, you know. So I think it is important to have all of that.
John Whalen, with HCDA, you know, when the free market wants to build condos right now, it seems like, and you know, who's going to build a medical office building or a grocery store? I mean, Whole Foods is the only one that I've heard about so far, and you know, that's not exactly in my price
appropriate for the
range.
clientele.
But I mean,
And the other end was 7-Eleven. They call that a grocery store.
Can you reassure
for clients.
Can you reassure this community that they're going to have all these amenities of a walkable, nice area with nice green? There's one park in the middle of it, from what I can tell, and that's it. You know,
Well, I think these things do fill in. I mean, I think the grocery stores will emerge because there's a market there. I mean, the more people that are in there, the supermarkets are going to see the opportunity.
And I tried for 7 years. I swear to you, every collection was supposed to be Safeway. I mean, we tried and tried.
So what
and when
happened?
they do their analysis, and there's not enough density, and that's the bottom line. And so,
Well, there's not
soon,
enough
though-
density now.
No,
But
but,
yeah, but
in,
they're planning for
in 36
30,000.
months or so, there'll be plenty of density.
Yeah,
to-
but will there be land
Yeah, absolutely.
for the grocery store?
Yeah, I think there's a great spot on Cook and Oahe that's a perfect candidate for a grocery store.
And it's been set aside already?
No.
No, it's not a question of setting aside, but the development plans for the two major landowners are not completely set, so that there is an opportunity as they come in to try to encourage the inclusion of certain types of uses. And another use that certainly the area needs is child care centers. They need to be located, though, in the Mauka area, primarily because that's where the population will be.
I'm sorry, did you say child care centers?
Yes.
Okay. I
The
thought,
Well,
families,
I will
families.
also say the other thing that they need down there is an elderly care home.
Elderly.
If you take a look at
Eldercare.
what is out there, Kahalanui, Arcadia, and there is nothing in Kakaʻako.
You know, it's a land price thing because the MW group is the best in the business at creating great assisted living facilities, and they have this perfect product. They just did another one, I think, off of the water off of Kapiolani, and you know what? It's just the land prices. Just can't make it work.
Well, that affects every development.
know.
So,
Because their box is so particular to make it
but
work.
we at HCDA should be able to make it so that someone can come in and build
yeah,
a
how you
elderly
cut that?
care home.
Yeah.
And this is something
John,
that
originally, John Whalen, when this was talked about, I remember there was so much more emphasis on the planning part. Well, we can do this, we can make them do this, we can do this. Then over time, it seemed like it evolved to, well, this has to be a free market-driven system. We always knew it was free market, but it doesn't seem right now that I'm hearing, yes, you will have that, yes, you'll have that. What I'm hearing is eventually you will when the market develops it. Is that fair?
We do have to find people to invest in it, but whatever those needs are, there are certain ones though that we can provide incentives for. Like for example, I just mentioned child care facility. If they're exempt from floor area, for example, calculations, that's an incentive for a developer to include a child care center in the building,
For facilities credits or something.
or facilities credits, or some other way. So that's something that we could certainly look at.
You saw all of this, and I wasn't. I didn't get to see it because I didn't understand back then. Didn't we overplan for 20 years and got nothing? And then we started to back off a little bit and went to form-based code, and then we saw it flourish in maybe a particular way we didn't want it to flourish, but a flourishing.
What's form-based code?
Form-based code. Okay, that's
I don't want to go
that's
too.
probably another show.
So maybe it's like it's loose and prescriptive, makes it way more difficult for the developers because developers are like artists in a way. We're kind of a lot of them are very
So
creative.
it's something that allows a negotiation process.
It allows us to figure it out and figure out where the market is today. And I think a great thing you brought up was medical office. Medical office is the only office product type that works in this town right now. Office is tough. And so you're right. And maybe when this cycle, crests, because it seems to be cresting, in particular the luxury segment, then maybe then the land prices start to sit and we can make those transactions work. And so a developer's always looking for that opportunity where they can create a return, invest the capital, produce something good.
But a lot of talk about just the developers think building, but basically you look at a lot of building that's around in Kakaʻako and they're vacant. So if you look at people needing uses, then looking at buildings in a more creative way as to how can this be used for childcare, how can it be used as a school, and it doesn't have to be the usual traditional way of, oh, there's a building, it's got to be residential,
Let me ask a quick question
That's what I'm saying.
about where we are in these cycles, because we did get a caller very early in the show, and I've been waiting to ask this question. Can the panel comment on Vida? Is it Vida or Vida? I never
Vida.
Vida, which was a building that basically got canceled because the sales weren't that good. John Whalen, do you think that we're backing off of this superheated period?
Yeah, sort of la vida loca, right?
That's great.
That's a 70s reference, so yeah. But I mean, you know, and what does that mean for Kakaʻako if the real estate isn't so hot?
It's happened before. It's happened before, and each time there have been some adjustments made, sometimes in the HCDA rules themselves. There was a period when, and the reason why we don't have as much affordable housing as we potentially could have, is that for a period, HCDA actually suspended the reserved or affordable housing requirement in order to allow certain developments to go ahead.
What's the underpinning of that, though? Why is HCDA making that decision? And it's jobs, right? I mean, we're keeping the engine of $200 million in investment going.
You'd have to ask the previous board.
No.
So union jobs are there. So
Yeah.
the Hawaiian dredgings, the Nordic PLCs, those are huge earners in our society. So keeping towers going up is very important to us generally. You know?
Right.
Steve, you look a little bit jaundiced when he was saying that.
Yeah, really.
No, I think there is a definite cycle. And obviously, in any business, there's a cycle, and especially in housing. And most developers want to hit it right. So they get in early. They're able to sell at the price that they want to sell at, and they can move on. If you're at the end of the cycle, all of a sudden you're building for, you know, $200 a square foot, but you can only sell it at $150 a square foot. And that's what happened to Vita. I mean, I think they just ran out of people to buy the units.
The last question that I have time for, John Whalen. In how many years do you think we'll be done talking about Kakaʻako and we'll just look at it and it'll be, oh, that's done?
Well, I hope it's before I die.
On that note, I have to say thank you to all of you. It's been a lot of fun, very interesting panel.
We're going to live a long time.
I need to talk about next week's show now. Next week, we'll examine housing prices in Hawaii. In January, the median price of a single-family home on Oahu reached an all-time high of $733,500. Prices are spiking on Maui and Kauai, too, leaving many homebuyers wondering if they'll soon be priced out of buying a home. Is Hawaii in another real estate bubble? That's next time on Insights on PBS Hawaii. I'm Daryl Huff. Ahui ho.